And we're live. Welcome to Fun with Cars, our another live stream. Today we have a very special guest. I thought that I was, interesting when I tell everyone that I'm building a Lamborghini in the garage and it's ridiculous. And I thought I had a kind of outlandish project. But today we have a special guest that there's no way I can compete with. So let me bring in Brian. This is Brian Pearson from B36HPeacemaker. Brian, welcome aboard. Tell us about your project.
Oh, gosh. You just opened up a can of worms, Jay. It's great to be here. Where do I start? How detailed do you want me to go? You want me to start with day one or?
Tell us how you got involved in a project like this.
Oh, okay. Well, very simple. First of all, I don't have any military background in my family, nothing like that to fall back on or admire. Very simple. Back in 1983, my father took me to the National Museum of the United States Air Force, pointed up at the B-36 and said, "Brian, I used to see those flying over when I was your age." I immediately connected with my father, and his love of aviation, got me started with the B-36. Fast forward to the year 2004, I started collecting instrument gauges on eBay, one every month, every couple of years. My always dreamed in terms of why I'm collecting these was to create a main panel to hang up on the wall. That was like the holy grail, In 2021, I got the dimensions to make that panel, which I waited a long time for, ran home, made the panel. And previous to that, I'd acquired a destroyed B-36 seat, which I restored. And I said, I got the makings of a flight simulator. I needed the center console, which I thought at that point was the main instrument panel sat on the console. And of course, it had your throttles. So I built that and then quickly realized that the main instrument panel does not sit on the console. It sits on the rudder pedals assembly. So I said, I need the rudder pedal assembly. That turned into having to make the sides. I wanted a simple yet modular, movable silhouette of a canopy, just so when I was in front of the 70-inch screen or whatever, I said, okay, I'm in a B-36. Well, about that time, my mother died. My mother broke her back. So my family, we sold our house and moved in to be her caretaker. I've got this huge garage. Well, not that huge, but huge enough for what I'm doing. And I have to be close to my mom. So here we are. Otherwise, I'd be around trying to find stuff to sell on eBay like a normal.
So just to give a little background history on the B-36 of what I know of it, when I was young, and this is the time roughly that you yourself fell in love with the B-36, I have a picture of me standing next to the tire from the XB-36 when it was in development. It is the largest military bomber ever produced. And when that came into production in the late 40s, it only ran for about 10 years. The airplane at the United States Air Force Museum is the last B-36 to fly, and that flew in 1959, which is the year that the Rambler I'm working on was built. So it's kind of crazy, the military tech that went into that airplane. And finding parts for it, as you said, you got stuff on eBay, is an almost impossible task. I just briefly looked at some of the websites like eBay and other things for any artifacts from those airplanes. They made like 380 of them. There are 4 left in the world. 4. And there's not much out there.
Yeah.
Tell me how. So you built the console, and excuse me, I'm going to sneeze. I don't know why, but anyways, you built the console and now expanded. How did you get to the actual building the cockpit and acquiring some of the things that you have acquired?
How did I get to building the cockpit? I guess that just came naturally. It went from the simple silhouette structure to actually building and duplicating the actual Convair design. I just became interested in the not so much the aura of the B-36 and, oh, wow, the airplane. But I've always been interested in like the little sub-assemblies and the government supplied equipment, the radar and the gun sights and stuff. Well, that energy I had and that fascination transferred over to like the actual airframe and oxygen lines and electrical lines and hydraulic lines and bulkheads and stringers and longerons and frames. And it just snowballed.
And you're building it all by hand. Just to be clear, you're building this all by hand. There's not like, you know, specialized tools. You have English wheel to form the aluminum. You have, you know, obviously a hand drill press and stuff, but
a milling, very basic milling machine and a very basic metal lathe. Other than that, I make forms and stuff out of wood, and it's all handmade. I mean, and the thing that I think that people have the hardest thing understanding is I don't have any engineering drawings. I don't have any plans. That stuff. Go ahead.
I got a question from chat. Ben's asking, how tall is the structure of the airplane? The real airplane is very, very tall, but how tall is the part you're building? Or if you know both?
Well, I'm 5'11", and you know, if you can see me, it towers about 2 feet over my head. It occupies almost square feet in the garage.
How many square feet? It cut out there for a second.
1,000 square feet or cubic feet.
Wow.
Yeah, it's 12 feet wide at the back, and I would say I never have measured it lengthwise. I'd say 12 feet. So 12 by 12 times 7.
Hey, I just want to reach out and touch base with people in chat. Mexican Spec just got here. Hello, Mexican Spec. So we have Mexico, Canada, and Michigan, Pennsylvania, all represented here in chat. If you are new to the stream or you're here visiting and watching, please comment down below. Let's try to break the chat. Tell me where you're from. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you have any questions for Ben, please shoot. Or I'm sorry, if you have any questions for Brian, Ben just said hello. But if you have any question for Brian, shoot them in chat so I can get them to him, because his project's really vast. The real airplane, the B-36, as a whole, the wingspan is 230 feet, if I remember correctly.
Correct.
And as from the ground to the tip of the tail, I thought it was like 47 feet, but I'm going off memory.
Correct.
So this is not something that you can assemble completely in a two-car garage. So you are expanding as you go, I assume. And there's some aspirations for this for everyone to enjoy when you're all done with it. This is your full-time job at the moment. This is what you work on morning, noon, and night.
8-10 hours a day.
Wow. Incredible. And for the aluminum parts that you get, where do you source the virgin aluminum? I'm assuming that the components that you have that you reuse, like the flight consoles and stuff from inside the actual airplane, you're pairing them with brand new metal, because at least from what I looked at, that's how you're going about it. Correct me if I'm wrong here.
Now, in terms of vintage aircraft equipment, none of the airframe is part of any vintage B-36. The only parts there's only 2 parts in that behind me that are from a B-36. One of which is the Astrodome, which is the clear bubble up on top, and the big main flight engineers panel. Other than that, it's either completely scratch built by me, and I make things look, for all lack of better words, perfect to the original.
Yes.
Extensive research on that. And the other stuff is like the D2 oxygen things for your demand for your oxygen. Then there's some comm panels in there. I could probably hold in my arms what is off of a real airplane, and in 2 hands what is off of an actual B-36. So it's 99% scratch built by me, everything.
And that is truly amazing. And you built the escape hatch as one of the things that you just completed. And I've seen that in action. You have posts. If you haven't, I wish I had the link to your channel at my fingertips, but It's B36HPeacemaker, all one word, on YouTube, and that's where you will find Brian's setup. It is quite amazing. Some of the shorts you made, especially with this is how we got to this topic. Let me tell you it straight out. So a friend of mine who retired from the Air Force, he lent me a movie. He's like, hey, did you ever see Strategic Air Command? I'm like, no, never heard of it. A movie from 1955, which highlights one of the main items in there is the B-36. The moral of the story was the B-29 commander who came back from the war, was retired, was playing baseball, and then got called back to the Air Force to fly B-36s for the Strategic Air Command as they came out in response to the threat from the Soviet Union in the 50s, right? So he's flying these B-20 or B-36s from a B-29, and was a bomber that was designed to fly unrefueled from the United States into Europe or into Japan, from Texas to Alaska. And it was pretty amazing. And you can see that movie on Amazon Prime. It has that movie. It actually is pretty good. The film, to give it the size of the airplane, really does it a good job. When you see the displacement, when it comes through the clouds, it's unbelievable. I don't know. I get awe-inspired. But the next day, after I was looking at how many planes they made, I was Googling all the stuff during the movie. The next day, in my Google feed, is a story about Brian's build. And so I start researching that and going down the rabbit hole, and I come up to his YouTube page, and I'm like, oh, this guy's got me way outdone. I got to hear this. And we connected, and here we are. So thanks for everyone for joining. Comment in the comments any questions you have for Brian, because a build from a car versus building a nuclear bomber in your garage, that's at a whole nother level.
Yeah, my YouTube channel is Building the Last B36, which that's what I'm doing.
Okay, your name on, I'm sorry, yes, Building the Last B36. That's what came up in my Google feed, and I found it absolutely amazing. And I'm like, I thought, so at first, and that title came up in my Google feed. At first, I'm thinking, they're building another B36. I'm like, they must have, new old stock or whatever, but then when I read the story, I'm like, this is even better. And then I got into it, and we ended up talking this week, and you came on board, and I appreciate you being here. So the anything that you could tell me, what are the biggest hurdles that you've run into as you started this build?
The biggest hurdles. I've hit my head on the canopy a lot. When we first moved here, I used to have the 36 on a big wooden dolly with casters on it, and I'd wheel it out into the onto the driveway, which is right here, so I could, number one, see what I was doing, number two, work. And there were a couple of times where when I was building the Astrodome port and it was hanging off the edge of the canopy frame, that because my van is parked right there, I'd have to run to the store, and I'd open up the garage door and just bam right into that Astrodome. I've lost a lot of blood. Biggest hurdles is anxiety of spending X amount of time, which is 2 or 3 months actual building. Combine that with the hours and hours I've spent downstairs in the basement in front of my workstation researching based off of pictures and dimensions, which I need to touch on, and then taking one component and then hopefully building that bridge between the two of them and everything work right, which it has. But just knowing that, if like these escape hatch panels that you mentioned earlier, each one of those has like 75 holes that have to match up. The metal has to be English wheeled to match the curvature of the canopy. So all that work to slap that on there and just to pray to God and everything that is holy that thing matches up on the first shot, because if it doesn't, I got another 3.5 hours or some re-engineering to do. That's probably about it. That and the working out here when it's 120 degrees ambient in the sun with a 10-degree welding torch in my hand. You want to talk about something that gets old?
Yeah, that's got to be uncomfortable. So I got some questions in the chat. Ben asked, what's the end plan? What are you going to build? What are you going to build the whole plane? So actually I had 2 questions related. Are you building the cockpit cabin or the whole plane, Dale asks.
All
It's
right.
essentially the same as Ben's.
Get that out of the way. The real reason that I'm doing what I'm doing, other than my compassion over the B36, is because I've been on the internet, on forums, since the dawn of the internet. And everybody that gets on these forums that knows anything about the B36 says, the warbird community that go to the air shows and whatnot, they say, let's get a B36 flying. There was a time about 5-10 years ago where you could not post a picture of the B36 and somebody would say, let's restore her to flight. And then a couple of comments down, somebody'd say, all we need to do is get a billionaire on board.
Yeah, exactly.
And I fought this mentality for 20 long years. So I said, okay, let's do it. Let's get a billionaire on board. So that's one of the, I can't think of the word to describe it. I don't want to say comical, but that's one of the more silly reasons I'm doing this, is because I'm waiting for a billionaire to get on board. Surely there's somebody out there who's got more money than they've got sense. But if that billionaire pulls up in his limousine right now, for all intent purposes, I would be happy to relocate to find a no smaller than a 500,000 cubic foot facility that also has a factory, a tool and die department, aeronautical engineers who are like, okay, I volunteer my time, insurance, just and just the plethora of things about building a real airplane that I don't know nothing about. If that happens, we're going to build the entire airplane. Let's do it.
That would be awesome.
You're looking at what you got right here. I might add a little bit to the back. Now, I've also got to say, if my YouTube channel picks up to the point where I can make enough to pay my little bills, which I don't have many, yay me. I would love to build the lower radar compartment. I would love to build the radio compartment. But right now it's not panning out. I never thought it really would, because my age group, they're not getting any younger.
Yeah, we had kind of touched on that, some of the enthusiasm, like when we were kids going to air shows and all that stuff, hasn't really continued for the newest generations. It just seems there's less and less interest in it.
It's still alive, and I'm sure that there are places in the country where it makes people think that, yeah. But if you don't mind, let me just touch on that. People need to understand that in the 1950s and 60s, back before you had a television in your house, you'd go to a movie theater to watch the news. And they didn't have all the glorified killings and the blood and the guts and the shock value that they have today. You'd go to the movie and you would watch stuff about airplanes, about the new super bomber to fly, or this super Chuck Yeager broke the sound barrier. That was what kids did, and they went home and they built models of airplanes and that. But now they've got the iPhone, or I'm sorry, the phones and the computers, and airplanes cannot compete with. A kid can sit in their bed, not even get out of bed in the morning, and they're in some far off galaxy with 20 of their best friends from all over the planet. There's no competition. So the interest in aviation, whether you like it or not, is dying. Just look at, how many people go to the chariot museums or want to see Roman chariots. I know that was 5,000 years ago, but it's the same thing. And me as an antique dealer, which I've been doing for about 10 years now, I've seen it. I've watched it. I used to go to these houses and go up in these attics and find airplane models and airplane toys mint in the package. But now you don't find that stuff because it's finite, just like everything. Right.
So you touched on one airplane that has some buffalo roots indiscriminately. Chuck Yeager flying the XB-1 to break the sound barrier. That airplane was built in the Trico Wiper factory in Buffalo, New York, under secrecy. Bell Aerospace needed a place to build the XB-1 that no one would know that they're building something that was top secret, and they had leased an area of the Trico Wiper plant. I believe my grandmother worked at that plant at one time. Not well, that plane was being built. But in the back room, it's a very little known fact that they built the XB1 there and then disassembled it and shipped it out to California for its maiden flight. So, in fact, the drill press that I have in my garage came from a company that supplied Curtiss-Wright and Bell Aerospace, both Buffalo companies at the time, and I use that for my Lambo project. So,
if unless XB1 is a Bell nomenclature, the right nomenclature is X1 or experimental one.
Okay, yeah, it's probably me misspeaking and jumbling things, but yeah,
experimental bomber number 1.
Right. No, it is the X1 to break the sound barrier. So just to be clear, in case I'm speaking silly.
Yeah, that's the kind of guy you're talking to. So
yeah, so there's
what the end game is for this. Can I touch on that right quick?
Absolutely.
I fantasized about taking this thing to air shows and letting people, walk in it, take pictures. I pitched the idea to one of the world's biggest conglomerations of insurance providers, and they said, well, we don't really insure things that aren't airplanes. It's an airplane, but it's not an airplane. And so I didn't really get anywhere with that. They told me to come back when it was done. But the biggest problem is things going to have to be a permitted wide load everywhere it goes. And I'm not an expert, but that doesn't sound very fun. But the most logical path forward is I recently, back in November of last year, went to a event at the National Museum of the United States Air Force, I met the curator, I met the generals, I met the events planners and everything. And I kind of tossed them the idea of I'd like to have that thing sitting beside 522220 one day. And they seemed pretty receptive to it, open to it. So that's kind of the direction I'm going to, because don't tell her, but I'm getting really tired of working on her because it's going on 4 years. And it's just like, I can't, because I sit around and envision these curves that I got to make in this metal I got to bend. I can't drive down the road coming into a sharp curve without seeing my B36. I can't shut my eyes without seeing sheet metal screws. I feel like
just the stress and the workload thinking about that. And you can see the craftsmanship in each piece. And I, obviously over the last few days with us talking and me researching more and more of all the work that's been done to get to this point, it's pretty amazing the craftsmanship that has to go into just one piece. I mean, there was hundreds of thousands of man hours that went into building the actual airplane, and we're talking a big chunk, but it's a small fraction of the entire airplane when you look at the tail section and everything. I mean, in the movie, I don't know how accurate it was, but there's a tube that goes from the cockpit area where all, the bombardier, navigator, and all that stuff. And the navigator, that's what your astropod that you were talking about. That's where they get their star map out and figure out where they are in the world. But there's a tube that go all the way in the back of the airplane. In the movie, they had a coffee machine and everything way in the back of the tail, like a little lounge setup. I don't know how accurate it was, but it sure seemed fun.
called a galley.
Yes. So I just get to a couple of things in chat. So every summer, this is from Ben, and he's in Ontario. Every summer there's a air show in a town over from him, and they get to fly over his house, so he gets to see them loop around. Now, in Ontario is one of the last two remaining Avro Lancasters, and I believe because I know that Ben is in the Greater Toronto area, the Avro Lancaster, which I've seen fly over once in Niagara Falls, that airplane is very special. Was a big part of World War II, like the B-29, B-17, and everything. B-29s are very rare. The Avro Lancaster is very rare. The B-36 is like super, super rare in my estimation in terms of parts and everything. I remember going to a local air show. We got the Warbirds, or whatever they're called now, because they had fallen out. Back in the 80s, I went with my dad to the Warbirds thing in Geneseo, New York, and they quoted it as the largest assemblance of B-17s since World War II. They had Chucky, which was the airplane, I believe, that flew in the movie Memphis Belle, and they had all the other flying B-17s gathered together, and it was pretty amazing. But
yeah, could I touch on B-36 part availability really quick?
yes, absolutely.
You warbird guys and you historians don't shoot me if I get this entirely not accurate, but after World War II, if an aircraft was deemed it had a value for civilian use, like a B-17 could be used as a cargo plane, for example, they were made available to the public. Fighter planes were not, but transport and cargo planes were. So that right there, plus the 36 was retired in 1959. That made it not an option to ever go to the civilian population. So unlike the bombers and the cargo planes that had a purpose, and men would go into these government facilities in Arizona, for example, and buy just warehouses of spare parts, nobody did that for the B-36. And a reason you cannot find B-36s on eBay, for example, is because there's nobody who's gone into the B-36, and gone into the wing and looked at those parts and have memorized them to walk up to like something I got sitting behind me and say, oh, that's a B-36 part. Unlike, all these guys who know like P-51s and B-17s, they can see that stuff sitting up on a rack, 100 feet away. So that's why there's simply no B-36 parts out there. A lot of people suggest that I go out to Tucson, Arizona, to the Air Force Base and get, no.
They're gone, I think. I think they got rid of all that.
No,
I don't think
Air Force Base is still there where the
no, but the B-36 is from there. I don't think they have a single one.
No, the last one was scrapped. I believe it was 1962, very early in the year. If not, it was most certainly 1961. But they were scrapped almost as soon as they were brought in, because they were essentially obsolete when they left the drawing board, because the jet killed them.
They added the jets to them. So that brings up a good point. So Dale mentioned that he'd love to hear a B-36 running. And as he accurately says, they used to say 6 turning and 4 burning, because they added jet pods on the tips of the wings to carry it through before the jet bomber, which the jet bomber was the B-52 that took over for it. But when I was doing the research for this, I came across this statement, and because of the maintenance on the B-36 that was required, that's another part of trying to get a flying one would be impossible. The maintenance was over the top. The crews had a saying, instead of the 6 turning and 4 burning, it was 2 turning, 2 burning, 2 smoking, no, 2 joking, and 2 smoking, and 2 unaccounted for. Yep. They were high maintenance airplanes, and I screwed that lineup. But
28 cylinder, 2 spark plugs a piece times 6 plus the 4 J47s.
320 spark plugs, if I remember correctly. So if you had to do a maintenance and change the spark plugs on all the engines, 320 spark plugs just for the piston engines. And it was a pusher prop. So yeah, the B-40. Oh, Dale brought up another one. So the B-47, there's another local story here about the B-47. My father and my buddy Kevin's dad both seen this happen when it happened. My dad was in the Air Guard. He worked for the electric company, and he was in lineman training. And B-47 was refueling just south of Buffalo. And when it was refueling, it exploded and came down, crashed, so that B-47, the pilot and co-pilot are buried in Arlington National Cemetery. The B-47 was featured in that film, Strategic Air Command, because that's what he got upgraded to, flying the jets. And some of the technology, because of those mishaps and airframes coming apart in flight, was adding nitrogen to the empty fuel tanks, because they were just getting into jet technology, and they were not aware that the fuel pumps could ignite the low fuel from the heat and cause them to explode. So there's a fun fact there that's kind of unrelated but related in the same sense. Jason's here from Grease Belly Garage. Thanks for joining us. He's got some cool projects. He's in Florida, so we got Florida represented. Uh, and and so, but he mentioned that he does not know a lot about airplanes, which most of us that are really into aircraft probably started out at a young age doing it. So I know that was the case with me. And at roughly the same time, you first went to the Air Force Museum in 1982, if I read my story correctly.
82, 83.
So right around the same time that picture I have with that B-36's wheel, which is what they were thinking, they thought, oh, we'll just supersize the tripod landing gear or the tricycle landing gear, and they made this huge tire to hold all the weight of it. Now, a B-36 could hold up to 86,000 pounds of ordnance, which is more than the B-52, more than the B-1B, more than the B. It's massive. It's more than a tractor trailer loaded going on the street
I was about
full
to say,
of ordnance.
there was something about the jet engines. There's a little bit of a misconception. The 4J47s weren't on all the time. They had two uses. Number one, for takeoff and climb. Number two, for a dash over the target. Other than that, they actually had things, aerodynamic cones on the front of the engines where they sealed them off when they were in flight.
So for the aerodynamic portion, so they weren't adding drag, but they didn't run them all the time. I knew that. I didn't know the specifics of that. So what, in terms of the build, which is pretty crazy, your next steps in the project, what are your next steps? You're going to complete the cockpit area, and that includes the co-pilot. Is the navigator quarters in the main canopy area or no?
The late model B36 that I'm copying has the aircraft commander, which people would see as being the actual pilot. And then to his left or right would be the pilot, which in a regular airplane would be the co-pilot. And then behind them are the two flight engineers.
Okay. So that doesn't include the navigator compartment or anything, that because you would have a navigator on board, probably a bombardier.
In the basement or the first floor would be the bombardier and the radar navigator. And behind them in the cockpit or in the compartment directly behind the cockpit down a bit is the radar or the radio operator.
That's wild. And in the width of the portion of the airplane that you have built in behind you is 12 feet, if I recall, say, right?
Yeah, the full width of the B-36 fuselage was 12 foot 6 inches. And since mine, the arch does not do the full extent, it stops at the maximum length of 12 feet.
Okay. All right. So your parts collection, how much of, so you have some vintage parts that you have incorporated in what you have, but you have additional components that aren't for this part of the airplane.
Yep.
How wide of a selection do you have?
Oh, geez. I guess you want to go up to that B-36 that used to be up in Ohio. You want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, that's an amazing story too, and I'd love to hear about that. I know about it, but tell us about it, Brian, because that's another amazing story.
Well, one of the things I have is the aircraft commander's yoke.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's made out of cast magnesium. It's one of my prized possessions. But in terms of what I've got about that airplane, I have virtually every electronic system that was in that airplane when it was on display at the museum. The radar bombing system, the navigating system. I have the complete tail gun system, which is the APG-32, along with the remote controlled turret system. We're talking tons of black boxes, literally tons. I have most of the landing gear doors for the main gears and the nose gear. I have just random stuff. I have bomb racks. But the biggest part I have is the aft compartment, which is, you're talking about that 80-foot long tube that went from the cockpit to the back of the plane. I own that entire aft compartment. In the standard bomber model, in that compartment, you would have your 4 fuselage gunners. You would have your radio. I'm sorry. your radar tail gunner operator. Since that airplane was a reconnaissance bomber 36, it had an additional 3 guys that ran the electronic countermeasures, the ferret system. And touch on that really quick. The ferret system, it consisted of the nose had the low frequency, and in the aft compartment you had your medium, intermediate, and high frequency, and that was able to monitor incoming signals from every radar and radio. Well, radar is radio, but every one of those spectrums. So those RBs would be flying around the Soviet Union, and when they were targeted, they would know where that signal was coming from, and because of the frequency, knowing what kind of a weapon system was. So you had those guys constantly flying, and we knew if they moved a missile when they did it, and we knew where everything was. So I had that compartment. I don't have any of that ECM gear, but I have all the tables. I have everything that went in there, and behind me is a chunk of that aft compartment. And
Yeah,
go ahead.
Dale asked about the aluminum piece on the wall. He was asking if it was a flap, a rudder, or an elevator part.
That's part of the aft compartment, and if you look down on the bottom towards the floor, you can see the porthole. That's the lower turret gunner, and that's
the side of the fuselage, essentially.
Yep.
So okay.
Yep. Near if you look at the B-36 with the big Air Force star roundel on the bottom, and there's an immediate circle under that roundel, that's exactly where you're looking, because it's got that big circle down there, and a guy would sit there with a gun sight, and that's how, with a big plastic blister, and that's how they would aim their guns.
So another question we had, I think we already answered it, that there is no intention really of this becoming a flying piece. This is definitely a museum piece that you're building, right?
Yes.
Is that okay?
Building a flight-worthy, airworthy B-36, it is plausible, but beyond that, you would literally need a billionaire.
It would never make sense. I don't ever.
The transport
cost
or is the logistics. You're probably looking at around $3 million just for the aircraft aluminum, mind you, 7075 aircraft aluminum, just for the skin. That doesn't account for the frames, the bulkhead. If you look at a real B-36, like in the wing structure, there's an inch thick aluminum in that thing, and it's just no.
Yeah. Grease Belly Garage asking, even if it was to just taxi, and I don't even think that building something to
that is definitely something that is it is more possible, because it would not involve the FAA, which that is something that I cannot speak intelligently about. I wish I could, but a ground taxi would work. But the problem is I would need pretty much a dedicated airport that could
accommodate that size of an airplane. There's not a whole lot.
You like tarmac fees. And then, once the state of West Virginia or whoever realizes that I have this thing, when do they classify it as an airplane, and what kind of property taxes? The list just goes on and stuff I can't even fathom.
Yeah, that's fun. And
Ben asked that are interested in the B-36 to even put your mind to it. It's
right. Right. I am. And, my family, I got a picture with my daughter in front of it. I showed you too. Ben asked, is that the first plane you ever built?
Yep.
All right. I thought that was right. The sheer mass of the B-36 in its entirety, when you see it at the museum, you can't even imagine it flying. I mean, just the propeller blades, I think the diameter is like 19 feet of, a propeller blade swinging.
Yep.
At the horsepower rating of the engines, 28 cylinder engines were like 3,000 horsepower each.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy.
The engines weigh like 3,000 or 4,000 pounds. Just that doesn't include the induction or the exhaust system.
Propeller or nothing, right?
I mean,
and they ran high PSI induction for their takeoffs and everything to achieve the horsepower they needed to get that behemoth off the ground. You know,
Yeah,
you're talking
dual turbo superchargers, and these things are like 3 feet by 2 feet, and there's 2 of them per engine.
just to handle the air going in the engine. So just think of the maintenance on that is absolutely insanity. And you're talking mid 40s technology, mid 1940s technology. So
I love people. I love my fans, but when you wouldn't believe how many people message me thinking that I'm actually doing it. And I'm not trying to fool people. I'm very transparent. And my biggest transparency is on my GoFundMe, where I've got it all lined out exactly what I'm doing. So if anybody's out there mad, oh, he's not really building a B36. Hey, I got my side covered, but it's insane. It really is.
speaking on that, I mean, the crowdfunding is important to continue building it. So obviously, to get it to a state where you can appreciate the midsize, of the 4 airframes that are still alive on this planet, none of them you can take tours through. They won't let you walk through a B-36 at the United States Air Force Museum.
Yeah.
So that's the point of this, is that you can get a feel when you see a picture of the plane, or in the case of being at the museum, you're standing next to it, you can get like a 12-foot wide, command console or whatever cockpit that you can see.
That's it is to, because there's not a lot of, until recently, over the past 6 months, there were really no videos of the inside of the B-36 on YouTube. And you were limited to a handful of actual interior pictures. And in terms of the H model, they're basically unaccounted for. And the earlier B-36s, which are completely different than this one on the inside, where there's maybe 10 or 20 pictures, period. So
how many H models did they make? So for those of you not familiar with aviation, they designate a letter after an airplane for different series, kind of like body styles on a car. So how many H models were actually produced? I did not research that.
I'm going to have to throw out maybe 200, because it was the definitive between the RBH and the B8 or the B36H. It was the definitive B36 in terms
of
numbers.
And you do have you gave me the link. You have the crowdfunding link is through GoFundMe, and it's at the B36H Peacemaker, right?
Yeah.
And
it's pretty much the only B36 on GoFundMe that's being crowdfunded. Not hard to find. I'm actually touching on this point. I'm actually modeling the first H model ever built, which is the bridge between the early model, would have been the F model, to the H. And I'm building the first one, trying to reproduce exactly what it looked like when it left the factory in 1952. It's serial number 50-1083, so 501083, and that's also helpful when finding it on GoFundMe.
When you model it after that, do you have pictures of an actual airframe of that vintage? Like, how are you obtaining the intricacies of that model?
Just really quick, 1083 was used for nuclear effects testing on the B-36 airframe. It flew through multiple thermonuclear detonation clouds to see what the tests were. So there are pictures of her being washed off at Carswell Air Force Base. But how I'm actually getting these dimensions, the technical aspect, the detail, number one, my airframe dimensions came from the B-36 that used to be up in Ohio in Newberry. I measured that thing for 2 to 3 hours a day for probably about 10 to 15 days over a 4-hour period. Unfortunately, when I first started measuring it, I didn't really have good access to the top of the canopy, because it was 15 feet off the ground and I didn't want to kill myself. And there's only so much I could measure, because it is an early model. So I couldn't measure the console or the flight engineer station, because it's not applicable. So I just got the airframe and canopy. In terms of the late model B36, about 6 months into the total project, a really, really great guy who I'd love to meet and just thank you from the bottom of my heart, jumped on board and started measuring their B36 at the SAC Museum in Omaha, Nebraska. That
Cool.
Go ahead.
That's cool. No, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's B36J Featherweight 3 aircraft number 522217. And he got on his back and did somersaults and took things apart and peeked in and risked his life over about a 3-year period and sent me thousands of pictures. However, he did not measure down to, he would send me a picture at an angle, at various angles. And there was, sometimes I had a hard time determining if that was 10 inches and a 32nd of an inch or 10 inches and an eighth of an inch. And that's all well and good, but that stuff adds up. An eighth of an inch after 3 years becomes an inch. That's my only complaint, but there's nothing, because I didn't expect him to sit there with a pair of digital calipers and send me thousandths of an inch. But he just did probably one of the most generous acts that I've experienced in my life, and I can't thank him enough. Another guy was because that area, the flight engineer station in that B36 was covered up with the original paneling and stuff. The B36 in Atwater, California at the Castle Air Museum, which is RB36H 5113730, I met a guy online named Rick who took me hundreds of pictures of that area of the flight engineer station and just helped me out dramatically. And he's another guy that I just can't thank enough. So that's how I got those dimensions. And recently I got the opportunity to go up into the cockpit of 52220 at the Air Force Museum. And the only problem was I had a very short amount of time because people were coming in and just there's a flurry of activity. And I was just so starstruck and overwhelmed that I couldn't focus on the technical, but I just panned around with the camera the best I could.
So you got to go in that physical airplane. That's amazing.
I've been in 1, 2, 3 B36s, 4 counting that one behind me.
Wow. So Chad's got some interesting stuff. Dale said he's got to give you credit. Found the biggest project you could find for your first effort. That's if go big or go home, right?
Right.
Grease Belly Jason asked, is it going to be to scale? Yes, he's building it to scale. Ben said his wife complains about how many tools he's got in the garage for his review videos. How does your wife feel about the plane in the garage?
Oh, my wife. Well, she's not legally my wife, but we've been together for 15 years come September. I try to explain it this way. If my wife didn't look as good as she does as a woman, I'd think that there was a man inside that head of hers, because our chemistry when she's in a good mood is through the roof. I support her and I let her do anything and everything she wants to do. And she pretty much does the same thing for me. She's one of those people that she's just very spirited, and she knows I've got a dream. She knows that this is who I am. So she just lets me do it. Otherwise, I do what I can as a father and take care of my kids and do everything I can for her and try to respect her. And I've done that since day number one. So I think that probably has something to do with it.
I'd say that is a good.
Ever.
So Dale just threw this out there, and I to contemplate. Just imagine the fuel burn of that thing sitting there idling with all those engines. I couldn't afford the gas on that. Probably the gas would probably cost more than my house if you think about it.
That's a good number that I should have got, because the fuel tanks on the B36 are incorporated into the actual wing spar, meaning the wing spar is the fuel tanks. And
right.
You're talking 200 feet of fuel tanks that are 6 to 9 feet tall and 12 to 15 feet wide. And they're I think in one of the books they say it's the biggest one is equivalent to a small swimming pool which is absolutely right. It's like walking into the room of your house, and every one of those fuel tanks, they have the 6 oil. Just the oil tanks are as big as my van. I mean, just you could take a shower in one of the things.
Right. Each of the engines had to have an oil tank because it consumed that much oil during flight that they had to fill everything up after the flight. So not only fuel tanks to get it to fly to Europe and back unrefueled, oil to keep the engine supplied with oil for that length of flight, and then they have to refill that. I can't even imagine the amount of oil and gas that in terms of cost, no matter if it's, even if it was in 1950, I don't think I could afford the price of what it costs to fly that thing round trip. It's pretty amazing.
Hurdle that one experience, if you could hypothetically get a museum to what's the word I'm looking for, to get rid of to relinquish one of their B-36s, is the B-36 used a very special fuel that worked with both the reciprocal and the turbojet engines, which no longer is made.
Oh, is that right? I did not know. So like JP4, JP7, which was for the
Something
SR-71, they had its own specific spec of fuel so that it would run both the piston engine and the turbojets engines, which is I did not know that. So then it was probably limited to what airports it could even fly out of, because fuel refineries would only make enough for those. So that's probably another reason why it had to be able to fly there and back, which is, I mean, the B2 does that, but I don't know if it does that unrefueled. But that just flies regular JP4, I would imagine. Jason mentioned, he wondered what the fuel capacity is. I don't know that off the top of my head, but do you know what B-36 fuel capacity was?
I do not.
I know it was like in tens of thousands of pounds. I know that, but
it was insane. It was. They're not going to be or I am not going to be giving rides at air shows anytime soon. Seat for $1,000 or whatever they charge. No.
Right. Ben asked when you started the build. I thought you said 4 years ago, but I'm not 100% on that.
Summer of 2021.
Oh wow. That's a lot and you put 10 to 12 hours a day in. That's dedication. Oh,
there may be a month where I did, other things to make money, because I still have a living to make, believe it or not. A month, and there was maybe a week or two here and there. Otherwise, it is, and I go out to dinner with my wife. We go shopping. We go whatever that wives and guys do. But other than that, you're looking at 8 to 10, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, not including the research, sitting in bed with a B-36 flight manual and discovering some aspect. Wow, that I never saw that before, up till 2 a.m. And then having to run downstairs and confirm that with the illustrated parts breakdown. 10,000 hours is probably not even close to what I put into this monster.
Wow. So I got a couple more in chat that I wanted to go. Dawson's here. Now, Dawson, he's in college now in the Carolinas, I thought, or maybe Georgia, but he was originally from Dayton, Ohio. So he probably has seen the actual B-36 in person. My brother asked to get a B-17 from Geneseo, which is near me in Buffalo, to France and back was over $250,000. That's how much it costs. I'm not sure. Was that even the B-17? Because I knew they flew the C-47 from Geneseo to France for the Normandy, 70-year Normandy D-Day. They flew the local C-47 that they have here in Geneseo there for the Normandy anniversary, I guess. And it was $250,000 in fuel just to fly that 2-engine plane, unless it really was the B-17. I didn't think they flew the B-17 there, but I could be wrong.
I have no idea.
But that's no, he's saying it was the B-17. So they flew. Now that B-17 that was here locally got sold about 5 years ago, and I think that's in Southern California now. It's the B17 with yellow and green stripes or paint on it. I don't remember what they named that, but that B17 has been sold, and I believe it's in Southern California, because when I was in Southern California a few years back, I saw in the airport at John Wayne Airport, they had a poster on the wall with the museum and everything that thing flew at. And oh, all right. Anyways, so I did want to get into, so obviously building my project, which is nothing like what you're building. I'm taking an actual running, moving car, and I'm scaling it to a Lamborghini-esque. It's not an actual Lamborghini. I will have a Lamborghini badge from West Palm Beach Lamborghini off a Huracan that's going to go on the back of it if and when I finish it. But I'm taking something that runs and moves, and I'm cutting and shaping and kind of metal artworking the thing to resemble something that, I wanted it. So that is one thing, because I kind of have whatever they call the artist's, interpretation. I can make it whatever I want. That's why I didn't try to scale it, because in order to try to make something look like the original, it takes, just in the fabrication work and studying and measuring everything, like you had mentioned, takes so much time and effort. That's why I'm so amazed by your project. I'm making something that looks like what you would in your mind think a Lamborghini looks like, but I can make it any shape I want at any measurement. I'm just kind of like, freehanding it. There's no, like, I made a couple panels, they didn't look right, I scrapped them and just went over again. And that's a few hours, but I already have a fender built in a few hours. You're talking small components, trying to get it to match a big puzzle piece, and you don't have the pieces of the puzzle. You have to make them. That's just truly amazing.
You have an artistic license. That's something that that got off at the last stop, for me.
Yeah, a long time ago, right? That left the chat a long time ago.
You just I was talking to my buddy this morning, and I was looking at my pictures when I posted them on the B36 interest group of when every chapter of the B36 build has its own block and time. I just got done yesterday. I put the last bolt on the last strip of covering this canopy in aluminum.
Yes, I saw that.
That took a month and a half. I was sick for 1 week, so that's 5 weeks, 8 to 10 hours a day.
Oh my!
Just a roof on there, or the aluminum.
Talking, so you're doing a combination of using a drill press. So every time you make one of those panels, so I know I've never used an English wheel. I've only seen it done on TV. So I'm not going to say, but the artwork involved in using an English wheel to get the compound curves that are necessary for an airplane takes hours of hard work and physical labor at a time. But then once you have that piece made and it fits, then you have to drill it. Now, I assume you drill it on a drill press, and then you have to hand drill it into your framework on the part behind you, right?
Yeah. Are we talking about how I what the steps made that I've taken to actually build what I've done? Do you want to open that can of worms, or?
Well, I'll give you the artistic, pleasure of opening just as much as you want to give anyone an idea of what it takes.
Well, I jokingly say on some of my posts that we're a bunch of B36 canopy enthusiasts, because what was supposed to be a simple silhouette, one-dimensional frame has turned into the better part of 3 years of my life. I gotta digress and go back in time, because it was originally supposed to be a simple frame, and then this simple frame was, it had to be modular, because I started off in the basement of our old home, which was like 15 by 12. So it had to be able to come through this door made in 1947 and down this very rickety staircase and turn a corner into this room. So I'm glad I never got to that phase, but I was able to bypass that. But the canopy, just I had to measure it piece by piece. And because I didn't thoroughly understand it, and when I first started measuring it, I was still in the mindset of building this very simple canopy frame. But as I learned about it and build it for myself and realized, well, no, that's how that goes together, I got more interested in the actual canopy. So I started looking at it harder. The biggest challenge I've had, you asked what the challenge was earlier, was getting the actual the shape of the B36 algove, which makes up the canopy, that aerodynamic shape. The biggest help I had was the guy from the SAC Museum, and I knew from the flight deck floor to the bottom, the actual skin was 60 inches. So I went with that, and I actually traced the canopy frame of the B36 in Ohio, and used that as a reference, and just had it sitting on the driveway, looking back, and just walking out and taking pictures of it, and comparing it and scaling it, and just endless stuff. But the canopy, it has two parts. It has what I call the endo frame, which is like the U-shaped main frame, and then it has a 1 1/4 inch strip that goes over top of that I call the exo frame. On this exo frame, there are 3 holes. There's a big hole and 2 small holes, where the big hole, these things called Tinnerman speed nuts or U-nuts, go into each one of those holes. And there's 1,200 of these speed nuts for a total of what I've estimated to be 8,800 drilling operations just for these speed nuts. And what those speed nuts do are allow the sheet metal screws, number 10 sheet metal screws, 3/4 inch long, to be able to go in there and fasten up tight. But when I first started building the canopy, number one, I didn't know anything about the speed nuts, so I just built the canopy. Then I went back, found out what these things were, so I had to drill these holes on the frames that have already been built, which caused burrs. And because that, and I had to actually stamp the frames. I made a die for 18-inch sections of these frames. So getting those to all align up in these beautiful shapes in the heat with the welding over my head, and literally willing something into thin air right there to have it come out looking what it is today, and just receiving all these extremely generous and amazing compliments. How I did that, it took a lot. And
Brian, are you able to, and this is up to you, and I thought we talked about it, but I didn't shore it up. Are you able to give us a tour of everything you have done from inside? Are you able to take your camera? And the most impressive one of the short videos that I saw was from the driveway, and then you walked in, and then you hear the sound of a B-36 flying over. If you could give us that experience, I think, how many of you guys would like to see that, if it's even possible?
we can sure try.
You guys ready for a tour of what Brian's done so far with this? I'm going to put you on full screen, and if you can probably do, whoops, hold on. Uh-oh. I think we may have lost him for a second. There you are. You're back.
All right.
Can you hold it horizontal? Will it turn out right, or does it make you go? There we go. Okay. So I'm going to see if I can make you by yourself. There you are. You got it.
I was hoping
you're all right there. That looks perfect. Here we go, guys. This is going to be amazing. Watch this from outside the garage. That gives you an idea of how much space that this thing takes up. That is the canopy of an airplane. And when Brian walks up to show you everything, yeah, this gives you another perspective of the size of it. He's even got, so those stars and stripes, for those of you not familiar, that is the stars and stripes of the Strategic Air Command logo, which they had a bomber fleet up in the air at any time in case there was ever a strike that we could strike back immediately. So each one of those ribs for the airplane, hand built, and then the skin attaches to it. That gives the airplane the strength. He hand built every single one of those, hand drilled every single one of those, and you can see in the command structure. Go ahead, Brian.
I have to make a point before we go any further, which I'm willing to show you every detail. I'm
Sure.
using top rivets and or blind rivets. Number one, because of the cost. Number two, I don't have an education in terms of how long the stems on the rivets need to be, because there's just so many different thicknesses that would be in the real B36. Plus, in terms of cost and time, at one point I had to draw a line, and that line was, I don't have engineering drawings, because if you look at it, okay, let's do this. Let's look at the real B36, and you can see just how many rivets there are.
Oh my.
Okay. There's literally millions of rivets. And then if you look at mine, there's fewer. The biggest hurdle, other than, for the sake of my obsessive compulsive disorder, which I think everybody has to an extent, I had to draw that line, because I knew that I was not going to be able to sit here and copy every single detail of the B36 airframe, because it would have driven me insane and it would have drained my bank account. Plus, with squash rivets, you have to have an air compressor, which I'm more than happy to have. But my neighbors, it'd be bang.
Oh yeah, they would hear that for miles.
My neighbors would kill me. So that's why I'm using the pop rivets, and I don't have anybody to operate a bucking bar. And another thing, in terms of using traditional rivets, and the reason I'm emphasizing this is because the one complaint that I have got is the pop rivets. Whenever an airplane is built, you have engineers that lay out all these components. They just don't walk into an assembly line and start building an airplane. They actually take into consideration of the tools that are needed and the people's hands that go into these parts. So they build them in a manner which they can be ergonomically riveted together and then incorporated into the airplane, if you're following what I'm saying. It's kind of like how cars made back in the 80s, you could easily work on them, whereas cars built today, you can't work on them. If that makes any sense.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to where we were.
Can you show us the operation of the escape hatch? Because I think that in itself is one of the most impressive features of your craftsmanship, because it is made as close to being the real deal as possible.
Yeah, I actually did a rubbing of the real aircraft on all these components.
Aha.
So I'm centered up good. It needs lubrication on the track, but
I saw, now you have videos posted that operating. I think it's absolutely amazing. And that would be how the pilot, co-pilot, commander, whatever, would exit the airplane in an emergency, like the things on fire, right?
Yeah, that was, of course, it served as ground ventilation too, but the primary focus, according to the Dash 1 flight manual, they call these escape hatches.
That's amazing. Are you able to pan through to show the gauge cluster and everything?
Yeah, I'll walk it.
You have there?
And the reason they made these as escape hatches is because the first B36s did not have an Astrodome port up there. They just had an escape hatch up there.
Uh-huh.
But you want me to go inside of it?
Oh, that would be awesome if you can. I don't want to mess you up, but look at the ribs on that you hand built. Jeez.
Yeah. Everything here is handmade.
You have a metal brake to bend that aluminum?
No. I done everything with this vise and this press and hand tools. Everything.
Wow.
Here's the bottom die that I used to make the frames, the big frames, which are now 12 feet long. I just made them one at a time, and there's a top set and a punch that go together, and I put a piece of metal in there and it made it. I had to trim it. There's actually videos of YouTube of me making those canopy frames 2 years ago.
Well, that is amazing in itself.
Yeah. I would like to know if it could be done, if it could be articulated, if you consider all the engineering and the education and the man hours that went into building this on the conveyor assembly line, how many jobs, how many people's jobs I'm actually doing to get to where I'm right now?
It's got to be hundreds of thousands. Literally, my friend and I discussed this when I told him that I was having you on. He's like, it literally took 100,000 people to build one of them. When you think about each one of those pieces, we're talking before assembly, were built at a factory somewhere. So
yes,
if it's a gauge, how many people are involved in making a gauge? Somebody's got to stamp the housing. Somebody's got to, cut the needle for the gauge. That is, oh my, look at that. Now,
that's all. I did all of that by getting the real airplane up in Ohio and placing my ruler beside of it. And I would go down on my computer on my 21-inch monitor and blow up the picture to where it was an inch with my ruler on the screen. And then I would trace that right off my screen. And that's the actual size. But that's how I made all those parts. It's quite insane.
That is insane. Look, now the gauges you have there. Oh, you have two of them made.
Oh,
you
yeah,
have two
patches. Yeah, I'm an idiot.
So tell me about, and you copied, so the guides that they are sliding on. I see the metal hanging down. That would be like the rails or whatever.
Yeah.
Are those that you trace those out too? Is that's how they work?
Yeah, I actually took a piece of cardboard on the real airplane and traced pretty much all of this, and it's identical.
That is unbelievable. I mean, that is an engineer and artwork all in one.
Yeah, most people don't fully understand that I have built all of this from scratch, sitting in the same chair I am doing this interview in front of that press or that vise. That's it.
Yeah, that. Oh, man.
Yeah, I here. Let me quickly describe the things that I have not made. Now, I didn't make that light. This is a real panel off of a real RB36, which is the gauges are different from the bomber model. I didn't make these shock pads. I didn't make that gauge or these gauges. I didn't make the toggle switches. I did not make this, but this was originally a 4-engine model, and I made the plate and took everything apart and modified it for the B36. I didn't make these gauges. I didn't make the press the test lamps or the oxygen panels, oh, here's this. This is there's the flight engineer's oxygen hose, and his panel should be in there, but that's where he stores his mask and everything.
Holy cow. Now, that's off an actual airplane too, right?
Just this right here.
Okay.
This is entirely scratch built, everything, with the exception of this and this panel and the gauges.
Holy cow.
I mean, this is all scratch built. I did not make that. I did not make that, with the exception of the rivets and these original. I didn't make those, but everything else, or that mount right there, this is all scratch built, and it's all fully functional. And mind you, again, no engineering drawings, no plans, no blueprints, and I built it in reverse. I built these before the airframe and the canopy was even an idea, and they fit in here perfectly.
Where did you get the hinges for those doors?
Off eBay. They're made by Hartman, and they're about $10, $15 a piece. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of those on this side, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's a considerable little investment right there. But I was working on building the heat duct, which runs from the heat exchanger in the back of the airplane so I can have heat in here. I made this. I made that. I did not make that. I didn't make that or this, but I made the housing. But
that is absolutely incredible. I don't know if you guys are catching this, but this is unreal. I'm just thinking of the hours and hours and hours.
Yeah, there's probably over 10,000 hours just in the fabrication. I did not make the actual sextant, but I made the sextant mount, and it functions like the original. You can pull this. I can't do it. Well, you can pull that, and you can adjust it for where you want to use it in the celestial map. I made all of the mounts. I made this entire Astrodome. I made these mounts. I made these, which dare I pull on them. Let's see if I can do it. I made these.
Oh my gosh.
There's 3 of those bugs. That actually came from like a grab bag of beads from Hobby Lobby. I made the Astrodome mount, which I'm going to make again out of steel. And of course, I didn't make the actual Astrodome, which is also a real B36. This jet controller is entirely scratch built, with the exception of that panel right there. That's all scratch built, with the exception of these guards. I still need to get the throttle quadrant in there. And what's funny is these boxes right here. Can you see them? These boxes?
Oh yeah.
These are T18s. They're called T boxes. And these were used by the pilot so he could have like quick access to see if his electrical system for the atomic bombs were working. And you had one box. You either had one box for an atomic bomb, or you had 2 boxes for a thermonuclear bomb, because one box would be for the atomic sequence, and the other box would be for the thermonuclear sequence. So this right here would represent a thermonuclear bomb in the bomb bay, but mine's going to have 4. There's only 1 or 2 very faint illustrations of these existing in the real B36, and I know that they're real because the B36 had 4 bomb bays, 4 universal racks with 4 atomic bombs, but there's 2 more that mount up here on the coaming above the instrument panel.
Now, when you got a tour in Dayton, did you actually see the real deal?
Yeah.
Did they still have them in there?
Yeah, absolutely. But the reason I'm bringing these up is because I actually made copies of these, and I've got one sitting back here. It's in bad condition because I've discarded it. It's not very, but I actually made copies of the stupid things. And I spent like a month building these copies. And then I found the real ones on eBay. And now I have 4 of them. That's the seat out of it. That's a real B36 seat.
Holy cow. Now I was impressed. I remade the launch control panel for a Atlas missile silo out in Lewis, New York. A long story to that, but basically when they got decommissioned in the 60s, they took all of the gauges out of it and all the controls and just left the console. And I met a gentleman similar to how we met at some freak thing. And we got a tour of the nuclear missile silo and met a guy that was making an independent indie film in the place. And he was talking about using CGI for the launch control panel. Because I'm like, I'm really disappointed the controls are all gone. I wanted my picture with my hand on the launch button. That thing comes out just like the real deal.
Yeah, that's completely scratch built. It goes up in these mounts. And I was really, really happy about building these mounts because there's no B36s that still have this equipment installed, because they did away with the Astrodome during the featherweight program because they had the periscopic sextant that just popped out to the airplane and didn't affect the drag.
Holy cow. Now, my buddy was a navigator in the Air Force. I'm sure he would be very impressed with that section right there.
Oh, yeah.
And I believe he knows how to use that because he was in KC-135s and C-130s, and those, I think, use that style of navigation equipment. I'm no expert in it. He is, but
that would be wild. These top panels are copied right off of the I have one picture, and it's kind of like looking down like that. I I tried my heart out to try to make a die set to make these cups, but I couldn't do it. Just wouldn't work. So what these are little 6-inch baking pans.
Yeah, I was gonna say you can bake some cookies with them.
Yep.
On the ceiling.
Well, they're cake pans, not cookie pans. But the point I'm bringing up is not only did it take 2 months to make all these pans and get them installed, they're all going to be covered up with fiberglass and Bondo to make the actual ceiling of the B36. So you won't see them.
Wow.
Yeah. I wish I had the floor in here because, as you know, I have the main instrument panel with all the gauges completed in the console. What I will do is I'll go on the other side and I'll climb up on top so you can get a look at the detail that's in the 12. I need to count the screws, but I'm estimating based on my usage that there are 1,200 screws.
That is unreal. What do your neighbors think my neighbors already know I'm a little bit different. When I tell them I'm building a Lamborghini garage, they're like, okay, because I've built other stuff weird like that, did a rat rod and stuff. But what do your neighbors say? How do you strike up that conversation? I'm just curious.
Let me walk out here really quick and so we can have this conversation. If you look at it, you got to understand the B36 has a very unique profile. Prior to the B36 and after it, they stuck with the streamlined airliner look. So most people think I'm building either an igloo or a carnival ride or a UFO. They have no idea. They don't know it's an airplane, and they sure don't know it's a B36.
That was going to be my next build in the garage after the Lambo was going to be an airplane, but I was going to build one of those ultralights. I saw the guy on there with the Home Depot special. You can build ultralights in your garage, in sections if you have a big enough garage but ultralights are like a tiny fraction of what you even got going on. I mean, you're talking, this is just insanity. I've never seen, I'm thinking in my mind, every time I see every hole that's drilled in every panel, just the amount of work, even if I'm patching a floor pan in a car that's got a rod hole or stuff, the amount of time just to cut that sheet metal out and weld it into place or drill it is just amazing what you have built there.
The thing that I don't show is when I make a mistake and I get down there and I'm like, that ain't right, I rebuild it. And I've rebuilt some stuff 2 or 3 times.
Wow.
These stupid things right here. The originals were just a hair too thick, so I rebuilt them.
Oh, now what you should do is when you finish it and you save those pieces, you can, should sell them off on eBay as, hey, this is what I made for this that were scraps, and people probably pay big bucks for it because those are cool wall hangers.
Maybe it's a good idea. Here's something cool. This is a picture of, or not a picture, but this is a part off of that the B36 up in Ohio, well, formerly in Ohio. Just a piece that I picked up because I knew what it was. This has been my straight edge for my grinder before I started using the power shears. So this produced a lot of my straight lines.
Nice. Do you know what section of the airplane that was off of?
If you go in the rearmost bomb bay, back to the rearmost bulkhead, there's an actuator that opened up the snap action bomb bay doors. It's a electro-hydraulic actuator. It's located in the middle of a section, and there's braces that go up to the K-frame of the bomb bay and fuselage. And this is just one of the structures that runs from that centerpiece to the main frame of the airplane.
Here in all this time, I thought I was, being impressive, building a car. This is unlike anything I've ever seen. I don't even know, like race cars aren't even this complex in terms of jigging and jigging a chassis and measuring. I mean, this is a whole nother level. Yeah,
I don't. People probably look at me strange why I'm not really into cars, and I'm just things that I can understand that not to honk my own horn, but if I understand it and I say I could build that, it really doesn't interest me. I mean, I think cars are great, but I know if I could get in my garage and start cutting on metal and make one. So that's my story right there.
Yeah, and yeah, and it's definitely less precise. Like I said, the artistic version, especially because if I make a mistake on a edge or whatever, and it affects 3-4 pieces down the road, there's always Bondo and MIG wire that can fill in the gaps, and it won't matter. But this is is a visual.
And whenever there's a problem with a Lamborghini, it typically doesn't fall out of the sky.
No, that's true. This is true. Jeez. And so how did you do the paint on there? It's the same thing with measured out. So you painted the corners. Yes.
That was just, I was driving down the road actually on my way to do some of my antique work. And I was like, I actually saw a picture. I can actually run inside to get it of one of the H models sitting in the boneyard. And I realized that because there was no standardization. They kind of painted it relatively in the same area. For example, the one at the Air Force Museum, it's much more forward. It would not be here. But on that one, I was like, on the historic image, I said, I can do that now because of the proximity. I recognized it. And so I went to the hardware store, got a can of blue paint and a can of white paint, and off I went. And it turns out they're exactly where it needs to be without doing any measuring. This is probably the only thing I've winged and I didn't actually measure. But these stars, which are too big, they're just I actually hand drew these on Windows Paint on Windows 7. I'm that old fashioned. I printed them off on my thermal printer, slapped them on there. You can still see there's still some residue on there. So I just threw them on there, and there they are. And I've gotten a lot of compliments on how good they look. But
it looks cool. It definitely fits the part for sure.
Yeah, on the whenever I do the real ones, they're going to be slightly darker blue with smaller stars. And something that I haven't told anybody, which I think it's really cool. If you look at the B36 up in Ohio, whenever he got it home, that B36 is it's an illusion. A lot of people thought for decades that was an entire airframe that was essentially put it on some trucks, haul it to a hangar, bolt the thing back together, and take it to an air show. No, I'm not going to get into it, but essentially he built that as a storage shed. The most of the fuselage that is up there is a 2x4 frame that he built to put airplane parts in. And some of that aluminum that he used to cover it, I've incorporated into my project. For example, the entire bulkhead one is built off of the scrap metal that he used to cover his B36, as well as all of that. So that's got a little bit of history to it.
That's cool. That's cool. I'm putting the name of the movie that got us together for this live stream was called The Strategic Air Command, and it was filmed in 1955, and it was Jim Stewart. Am I right on the main actor?
Yes.
Hopefully I'm right on that. That was in that movie a little before my time, but he was a famous actor, and that movie was filmed right in Texas at an Air Force base using actual U.S. Air Force bombers, state of the art at the time in 1955, or essentially only less than 10 years old, right?
Yeah, I actually made a video. It's my most viewed video on YouTube where I compare the historical and technical inaccuracies to the film, because interestingly, General LeMay, who wanted to make the movie as a propaganda tool, he donated a tremendous amount of what was classified and restricted equipment to make that mock-up at Paramount in California. And when other Air Force generals watched that film, they saw that and they were quite upset that they actually let them go into a real B-36 in film, which they did not. It was completely a set.
Oh, really? So they built the set. So when they filmed in it, it was not an actual airplane, because
Correct.
At the time it was classified and they didn't want the Soviets knowing what was
Correct.
really
if
the
you
real deal.
if you're a B-36 aficionado, if that's the right word, you'll notice immediately that the flying and taxiing scenes used a B36H, which is what I'm building, whereas the internal scenes use an early model B36 between the A and the F models. The inside of the early models is completely different than what I'm building and what survives in the museums today. But there's one of the technical issues.
Wow.
There's only one early model B36 cockpit still in existence, and that's the one that was formerly in Ohio, which is now up in Michigan.
Okay, so just for, because you and I know about that, but others watching don't know, that was that airplane was a reconnaissance airplane that was scrapped, and the scrapyard that got the metal, somebody bought from the scrapyard and then hauled all the pieces to their property or farm and had essentially most of the complete B36 cut in sections, which you have some of the sections of.
They had about 50% of it.
Just imagine how much money in aluminum that was, you know?
Aluminum and magnesium. I think he paid, $17,000 for it in 1970s economy.
Oh my, that's a few used cars, you know,
Yeah.
or new cars.
And I think he made 24 trips over 2 years. And a lot of pictures in magazines and on the internet don't do airplanes justice. Even a fighter, when you look at it on your phone or on your computer compared to what it looks like when you're actually standing beside of it, a P-51 is a small airplane, but it's huge. A B-36, a man with only help from his children and his wife at this time, drug home half of a B-36 halfway across the state of Ohio with pieces that were probably 15 to 20 feet wide. His story is amazing. And for me to actually, share a part of those people's lives is the single greatest gift to my life. I mean, every minute of it was absolute euphoria,
Do you know what his ambitions were with that aircraft when he got it? Did he have like any kind of, with just saving the historic part of it? Do you know what
he sentimentized with? He worked at a scrapyard where they were scrapping aircraft engines, and he was just like any collector out there. He realized that they were no longer making this stuff and he needed to sell it. And if I'm speaking correctly, I think that a lot of that drive was based on the fact that he could not ever join the Air Force. And when he was even younger, like his entire collection of model airplanes was destroyed in a house fire. So I think he was in a way trying to rebuild that or reacquire that. But there's one thing they say about him. He was either an airplane collector who liked junk or a junk collector who liked airplanes. And that is a very good way to summarize that experience.
Yeah, I don't know anyone that's bought or collected an airplane or old military stuff of that nature. That's quite the undertaking.
If there is one man on this planet of all the historical features that I regret not being able to meet, it is him. I would love to just talk to him even for a minute. I respect him.
Just to pick his brain to see what he was thinking. Yeah. And Dale had mentioned that Jimmy Stewart, who stars in the movie Strategic Air Command, he was an actual Air Force pilot. I believe he was a B-29 commander during World War II. And when he came back from the war, started working in Hollywood. And then obviously when they created this film, which I think partially was to get people excited and involved with the Strategic Air Command and the Air Force, maybe even some propaganda to, boast power, they cast him as the pilot because he had the natural experience from World War II of flying a B-29, so it kind of fit in the role.
Yeah, that movie was pure propaganda because they needed old guys that had that experience. They didn't want 18-year-olds, because you got to think about it. every member of that crew working as a team was responsible for dropping something on a city that had the potential to kill millions of people in a picosecond. And
Right.
one of the things that I can't get over is when those guys went out, they never knew if they had a bomb in their bomb bay until they, of course, went to Albuquerque and picked it up. But they didn't know when they left the ground if they were going to come home. And furthermore, if there was ever going to be a home to come home to. 18, 20-year-old guys, man, with that amount of responsibility that they had to bear, and it's kind of funny if you listen to 50s music, how kind of silly it was and compared to what we have right now, the kind of stuff you'd hear at a car show. That's the kind of stuff that they were listening to on their communication system whenever the radio operator was cool enough to pipe it through the entire airplane. So they're listening to the Palisades Park or whatever songs, the Elvis, when they're on their way to potentially annihilate millions of people in a flash.
Yeah.
That was their job. That's what they did 24 hours a day.
Dale, who's watching and in comments, I know you can't see them, but he mentioned that his dad was actually had a desk job in the Strategic Air Command when he was in the Air Force. And the Strategic Air Command, I think, was active until 1992 or when the Cold War ended.
Yeah.
They had Strategic Air Command bombers that were flying hot, armed, ready to go during the entire process, so that if there was ever an attack made, we had the ability to, respond to it. So, which is, a story in itself, obviously.
Yeah.
But in the movie, he gets, cast. Well, Jimmy Stewart plays a character who is retired from active duty Air Force and is in the civilian life as a baseball player in the major leagues. And then Strategic Air Command, somebody he knew wanted him back in, and they reactivated him. And anyone with the military experience knows that if once you retire, there's a window of time that under your contract you can get recalled. And he was recalled and then ended up flying the B-36. And it's pretty interesting story and interesting movie. And when you see that thing flying in real life and you hear it, they have the actual airplanes flying overhead and they capture the sound that they made, is just kind of awe-inspiring.
Yeah, had a very unique drone that every person I've ever talked to said that you could see the contrails, and they would fly in a formation of 3, which was the optimum position for the defensive system on the gunnery system. They said that you could hear them and they would shake the earth, which you're talking 18 Pratt & Whitney 4360 cubic inch engines. I believe every word of that.
My dad, who graduated high school in 56 and then went into basic training, he heard them flying when he was in basic training in Texas. And right around the same time that Dale, who's here with us, his dad was in the Air Force too. So pretty amazing,
Yeah. And what's amazing about the B-36 is there were no integrated capacitors on the entire airplane. All of this stuff was done with vacuum tubes and capacitors, and shame on me for not being able to quote electrical components. But
no, it was all very rudimentary stuff, just like that nuclear missile silo, that Atlas missile. The Atlas missile silo had a metal tube, for lack of better saying, that went from inside the silo, because the missile was stored below ground, 187-foot hole in the ground, and it had an elevator for the missile. But to calibrate the guidance system for that rocket in 1960, there was a tube that was drilled from the middle of the silo up at an angle to point to the North Star, and there was a technician, so it pointed at the missile. When like something out of Indiana Jones, when the North Star got in that window, they calibrated the guidance system for the rocket using a tube, like a scope. It was very, very, those missiles in 1960 for a nuclear missile was very, very rudimentary. It was very, very crude. Oh, I lost you. Hopefully you come back. Oh, there you are.
Yeah, I'm trying to get my phone back in there.
Yeah.
I will not do that again.
No, that's all right. We're fine. It was a very brief pause. So
I had to grab my coat. My 50-degree sun has turned into about a 30-degree wind.
Ah, yes. Yes. So before we part ways with everyone, I did want to just go over a couple of things that I had questions on, and I think that other people would be interesting in knowing.
Did you have a question about my prized B36 possessions?
Well, we definitely want to talk about that because you did show us the yoke.
Yep.
Well, what else do you have from those that?
That is the actual data plate off of B36 J3 522226.
That's very close. 222. I saw the 222. That's from the Air Force Museum.
Yeah, it shared the assembly line with the with 2827, 2220, and 2217. They were all being built. And this data plate and this aircraft number has a very distinct history. This was the last full hemispherical defense bomber built by the Air Force. It is the last bomber that had full hemisphere turrets. You're talking at the lineage from the Keystone bombers and the B-1s that had these turrets, the 17s, the 24s, the 29s, the 36s. This is the last B-36, last Air Force bomber, a last American bomber ever built that had turrets bristling all over the fuselage.
How were you able to acquire said piece of history?
I got this about 15 years ago on eBay on auction. I paid over $600 for it. And I about had a heart attack waiting for that timer to get down to 0.
Holy cow. Any of those pieces or components, if you were even able to get your hands on them, are so rare. And is there still a collector's market for something like that? What are your other possessions from the B-36 that you have that you can share with us?
You really want to see?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me grab these so some entrepreneurial B-36 thief doesn't grab them. What'd you get today? I got a B-36 yoke. All right. I just put my coat on. Now I got to take it off.
Sorry, I didn't mean to do that to you, but we are curious.
I will take. Now, this doesn't account for the stuff that is out in the garage, which everything you saw behind the B-36, that's all components for the Ohio B-36, which we'll refer to as 571 because it was serial number 4213571. Let me show you some parts to her.
And 42, I believe, is the year of production, no?
That is
42?
the year. That is the year that Congress allowed funding for the plane to be built, or the year it was ordered.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
that is the nose gear, landing gear doors to 571. Both of them.
Wow.
Yeah, those are really special to me because when it was at the Air Force Museum on display before they scrapped it, they actually had a little metal hasp with a padlock, and part of the hasp is up there. I've got the other half in one of my junk drawers, but I think that's really cool. These are the aft compartment. These are the gunner, the turret gunner. That's their walkway that they sat on. They're both halves are right there. I actually made a video last week that covers those. I don't have a light in here. I'm a cheapskate.
That's all right. It looks good. You can see it.
Quite the minimalist. This is the turret entrance door to 571. On the right hand side, you can see the 1 off of the serial number 571. That's in pretty much every picture of it when it was at the museum. This right here is really cool. It's not a B-36 part, but it's a B-50 part. That was actually the guy up in Ohio had that up on top of the B36 to cover up that empty hole for 20 or 30 years. You can see that in pictures.
So those pieces you said of the B36 that were in a museum, what museum were they in, and what happened to the museum?
They were on display at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. What happened was that airplane, it did its full service life and it was retired in 1957. And it sat outside, and it's just a gargantuan airplane. And the problem is that the magnesium skin, it reacts with oxygen and becomes magnesium oxide very quickly. So it just fell into a dilapidated state. They painted it in 1962, I believe. But what they did, rather than when they moved the museum to where it is right now, that is the new location. The old one was at the base where they did the jets. I think that's Area A. But they couldn't move the B-36, and they would have had to restore the whole thing. So rather than doing that, they simply flew in the B-36 that is on display currently, and they scrapped 571.
Oh, okay. That's a part of the story that I didn't know. I've only known the B-36 that's there in its final condition since I was a kid. I did not know they had a B-36 on display prior to that. Now, I was even... I don't even know when it was still open, when they had the X planes and all the presidential planes on the base where you had to take a bus from the museum onto the base. I was there, but then they built the last hangar, I think, is when they moved all of them off the base to the museum. And
yeah, you're completely at Area B, which was the original Patterson or Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. That is the new current location. The other one was an old repurposed engine repair facility that used to be the museum in there. And on a little parking lot right beside that, about a few blocks from the main flight line, there was a museum there with the old B-36, and all of the airplanes that were there, with the exception of a few, were moved via closed on a Sunday US Route 4 in Dayton, and they moved them via road. But they couldn't move the B, so they scrapped it and flew in another one.
Oh, jeez. And that was the last B-36 flight ever from that airplane, from what I read.
They brought in to replace that was the last B-36 flight.
So moving from the state you're in now with your build, what are your next steps, or do you have like a timeline or like a...
My next step is to build the flight deck floor. The reason I didn't do the flight deck floor sooner, which I told people I was going to, that was the plan, is I realized that when I was going to build that flight deck floor, that I was going to be hitting my head a lot more because I'd be higher off the ground. So, and tripping on the silly thing, because there's actually steps that go up to it. So I said, I'd better finish these overhead panels and stuff. So the flight deck floor next. What's going to be incorporated into that are the control columns and the shoot, I can never think of what they're called that cause that stuff. When you turn one yoke, they're called segments. There's segments that make the yokes both turn simultaneously. And there's, for the rudder pedals, they both move simultaneously, and they're linked via these things called segments, which live up under the dashboard. It's this big cast piece with all these bearings in it that cause all that stuff to move simultaneously, and then transfers that energy back to the control surfaces with the rudders and the ailerons, elevators, and stuff. So there's a lot of work to be done, but it's going to be relatively quick because I don't have that stuff is completely covered in all of the museum airplanes. There's only so many 1 or 2 pictures of it, so I'm going to have to use a lot of artistic license. But I do have some technical illustrations of it, but I can't be as picky on that stuff because it's simply you can't see it in the real airplane, thus you can't take a picture of it. So,
well, I look forward to being able to see your steps moving forward. Now, obviously, I'm subscribed. We'd love to touch base with you again as your build moves on, as you make more and more progress. I think this was an awesome. I know it's a little bit outside of the scope of my channel because my channel is mostly cars, but I really I don't think anyone that watches this can't be appreciative of the build, especially if you're building cars, to see the work that you've done. So I hope that we can touch base at some point in the future to see your progress and hopefully see this, to completion. And hopefully at the end of it, it finds a home so everyone can appreciate it in person.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so Dale's subscribed. So I invited everyone to subscribe to your channel. And I got Nasa's here. No, yeah, it's not my Lambo behind me. It's just for show. So, so I got some other people here in chat. I think everyone got a good sense of the amount of work that you got put into your project.
If you don't mind me asking, in terms of what makes this project finished and expand, it's not monetary donations. It's the help on YouTube. I need the subscribers are great, but I need the watch time and the clicks. So if you could be just generous enough to watch my videos, if you can stomach them, I know I'm very repetitious, but that right there is what's going to make this thing bigger and finished at the very least.
Well, and I thought that I had put out, whoops, I don't know what happened to my screen there, but the link, I will link it on my channel too. I had a bunch of stuff that I had posted on there. I don't know. Actually, I might be able to share my screen just so we looked at it with you gave us the tour, but your channel is, I have the link to the video in here. I can put, there we go. I just had to get to the right screen. So I'm going to put your link in chat to your YouTube page because, as you said, I can put a banner on here. So I'll put it in chat and I'm going to put a banner on the screen so that everyone has the ability to see it. This is, oops, there it is. So on YouTube, I know the last B36 built, but on YouTube, if you use that link, it takes you right to your page too, because your YouTube name and or channel name are two different things, right? So mine's Fun with Cars, but the FunWithCars716 is what gets you to my page. So I have that link up there for everyone so that they can look at, appreciate, and subscribe to your channel. Hopefully, we get a lot of views after this too, because I think there's a lot. There's a lot of videos on there showing the individual pieces and components that you made that anyone with interest in it would appreciate. So, is there anything I miss out of this that we'd like to talk about before signing off? That's my question.
No. I could probably sit here and talk until my face turns blue, but I don't want to bore anybody.
Me too. I think it was very interesting. Of course, I'm biased because it's my own personal opinion and my channel, but I appreciate you taking the time out for this conversation. I think it's important. I think it's interesting as all get out. I mean, it's not even anything that I would even imagine trying to do, but seeing the section of those components that you do have that you had in your driveway, you posted on Facebook, even just the pieces of the airplane, and just see how massive they are, even to move them. I mean, you're using a cherry picker engine crane to move those around. I don't know how much they weigh, but they are bulky for sure.
Yeah, some of the big ones are 300-400 pounds. I mean, they got plating on the bottom of them. It ain't no joke, man.
And those are magnesium, I thought too, right? You said the skin's magnesium?
Predominantly the skin was magnesium. However, in the areas where the crew was that were pressurized, it was exclusively aluminum because magnesium breaks after it expands.
Okay.
They're all aluminum.
Okay, I didn't know that.
And it's really weird that one thing that many people don't know, if you look in the technical manuals or the illustrated parts breakdown, a lot of the aluminum under the engine nacelles and under the aft compartment and forward compartment is a little bit thicker. It's probably an alloy They actually call that armor plating. So, yeah, it's just a little bit thicker. It's armor plating.
Well, they probably figured for, machine gun,
Yeah,
attacks from a fighter, it might provide some kind of armor protection. Obviously, it was pressurized cabin, so that was kind of important.
Just something I'd like to touch on really quick. Aircraft aluminum. One thing I'm having to do on my B36 is aircraft skin is it's 20 gauge metal. It's about 1/32 of an inch. I'm having to use 60 gauge, which is 1/16 of an inch, because it's in terms of the English wheel, the 3003 non-alloy, it doesn't hold its shape. So I'm having used the thicker because it does hold its shape, but it's still 3003. But just as a point, I've probably used 10 to 15 10x4 sheets of aluminum that I get for $100, give or take, depending on how the economy is working. Aircraft aluminum, just for for 7075, which is low grade aircraft aluminum alloy, is $300 a sheet.
And how big is it?
And that's only 4x8, and that's before shipping. Imagine how much a rolled up sheet of aluminum. So that's why I'm having to use what I use. One thing we didn't touch on, my GoFundMe is almost $6,000, and it's been up for almost 2 years now, which I thank everybody so much. And just to remind people that if just one of my subscribers on YouTube would donate $1, that'd be $5,000. I could build until the sun doesn't shine. $5 donations, that stuff adds up, if not immediately, if I need to run out and get a tool or a can of paint or a thing of rivets. But in terms of my personal investment before I started my GoFundMe, this thing's probably floating $8,000 to $9,000 in what you see up there, if you include the vintage equipment.
Exactly. Yeah, that's quite a bit.
I hate to be blunt, but it is not free entertainment,
Right. No, I get it. I get it. I will post a link to so I will attach it in the comments of this video when it saves. So if you're watching this, you'll be able to go to your GoFundMe. I'll have a link in there for your channel too, which also it all ties together. So.
And I got to mention the B36 interest group on Facebook. If you're really interested in my build, before I started posting on YouTube, I would update there sometimes twice a day. And you can go back to the day I started cutting the old road sign to make the main panel. It's all there. And if you're interested in the B36 history, that's the definitive place to go on the internet. Not to mention, way back in the day, I was posting pictures of my artifact collection on there. So there's just it's a museum. It's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. All on the B36 too, which is, once again, I don't want to be redundant, but so rare in itself. So anyone with an aviation appreciation or things that are rare can appreciate what's on there. So Brian, I really appreciate you taking the time. Once again, B36HPeacemaker is Brian's channel. Please visit. Oh, it cut out there for a second.
Building the Last B36. You can find me anywhere on the internet.
Yes, Building the Last B36, and that is how I found you. That was in Google feed. That's how I found you and found your story, which I was not aware of all the time I spent on YouTube. But I did find you in your channel. I really appreciate you taking the time, and I hope to have you back sometime. And we will be following and keeping up to speed on your project. So appreciate your time. I appreciate everyone being here. Dale, Jennifer, my brother, Nas was here. I think I'm forgetting a few people, but I apologize. And thank you for being here. Thanks again, Brian.
Can I thank you, Jay?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it.
And I wanted to thank all my subscribers, all my fans, all the people who have helped me with information, and the guys at the museum. And I want to thank all the museums. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody.
Absolutely. I can't believe that you got guys from the museum to help you. That's kind of incredible in itself. Because
if you want help from a museum, you got to see what you got to go through.
Yeah, well, you have to build a B36 to get out from the guys that work there.
Oh God.
All right. So this was awesome. 2 hours. 2 hours we've spent together. I appreciate everyone's time. Check again next week. Hopefully I make some progress. I'm about to try to start the 59 Rambler to see it will ever run again after 45 years. So that'll be hopefully this week's update. So thanks again, Brian. Thanks everyone for being here. Have a great week. Take care.
Yes, sir.
All right, Brian.